North Korea has just tested a nuclear-capable cruise missile from one of its newest warships, and the footage state media released this weekend gives the clearest look yet at how fast Pyongyang is trying to turn its navy into a floating extension of its nuclear arsenal. This is happening right now, and the details of what was actually tested, what it's capable of, and where this fits into North Korea's broader weapons program are worth walking through carefully, because the pace of development here has genuinely accelerated over the past year. Let's set the stage with exactly what happened over the weekend. North Korean state media reported that leader Jong Un personally observed the test firing of a strategic cruise missile, along with evaluations of anti-ship, anti-submarine, and air defense systems aboard the naval destroyer Jong Un. According to the state report, the tests were actually conducted on Friday as part of a broader assessment of the newly built warship's combat systems, and they included checks of target detection and information processing capability, integrated firepower systems, naval guns, automatic cannons, and electronic warfare equipment. Kim was briefed on the vessel's full weapons evaluation program before watching the cruise missile launch and the rest of the tests play out. According to the same report, he praised the reliability and combat effectiveness of the destroyer's weapon systems and used the moment to underline what he's described as the growing potential of North Korea's naval combat capability to strengthen the country's overall military readiness. That's the official framing. Here's what it actually means in practical terms. North Korea is putting nuclear-capable cruise missiles on a naval destroyer, which gives Pyongyang a sea-based nuclear delivery option that doesn't depend entirely on submarines or land-based missile launchers. That matters because a naval platform like this can maneuver, reposition, and potentially operate closer to a target than a fixed inland launch site ever could. And it adds an entirely new leg to what analysts call North Korea's nuclear triad ambitions: land, sea, and now increasingly a more mobile ship-based option layered on top of whatever submarine capability the country has managed to build so far. American intelligence assessments have never been fully confident about whether North Korea has actually built and fielded a submarine capable of launching a nuclear warhead. It's considered likely that Pyongyang has at least some limited capacity in that direction, but it remains unconfirmed with any real certainty. What just happened with the Jong Un is different, because it isn't hidden underwater and unconfirmed. It's a surface warship, tested openly, with footage released specifically so the rest of the world would see it. The missile test itself is worth walking through in detail, because the footage released alongside the state media report shows a full salvo, not a single demonstration shot. Multiple missiles were fired in sequence, climbing off the deck one after another in a rapid volley. Watching that kind of full salvo test tells you something beyond just the missile works. It's a demonstration of magazine depth and fire control coordination, the ability to launch a meaningful number of missiles from a single platform in a short window, which is a very different capability than a single isolated test launch. A destroyer that can only fire one missile before needing to reload or reposition is a curiosity. A destroyer that can put a dozen missiles in the air in quick succession is a genuine strike platform, and that's the capability this test was built to showcase. Now to the ship itself, because the Jong Un has had a rocky path to get to this point, and that history matters for understanding how seriously to weigh what just happened. The Jong Un is the second vessel in North Korea's new class of 5,000-ton destroyers, following the lead ship, the Choi Haeon, which North Korea commissioned into active naval service back in late June after more than a year of trials. The Jong Un itself was actually damaged during a botched launch ceremony at the northern port of Chongjin roughly a year ago, an incident that reportedly triggered a furious reaction from Jong Un at the time, given how heavily the ceremony had been built up as a showcase moment. The ship was subsequently repaired, and what the world is watching now is the tail end of its extended sea trials and weapons evaluation process. According to the state report, Kim has now ordered officials to complete the destroyer's testing program and formally commission it into active naval service within the next 2 months, which would put a second nuclear-capable strike platform into North Korea's active fleet on a genuinely fast timeline. South Korean officials and independent defense analysts have suggested that this entire destroyer class was likely built with meaningful assistance from Russia, consistent with the deepening military relationship between Pyongyang and Moscow that has developed over the past several years. That's a detail worth sitting with, because it means the leap in North Korean naval capability represented by these new destroyers isn't purely a product of domestic engineering progress. It's plausibly the direct result of foreign technical assistance flowing in specifically because of the broader realignment happening between Russia, North Korea, and the wider array of countries positioning themselves against Western-aligned security architecture. Some analysts have pushed back on how effective these vessels would actually be in a real combat scenario, questioning whether the underlying systems are as integrated or reliable as the ceremonial unveilings suggest. But the pace of construction and the willingness to test live weapon systems on camera both signal that Pyongyang, at minimum, believes these ships are ready to be treated as a serious deterrent asset rather than a purely symbolic gesture. Kim's ambitions for this program don't stop at 2 ships either. He has publicly called for the construction of 2 destroyers of this class every single year over the next 5 years, and separately outlined plans for a follow-on class of larger 10,000-ton strategic surface combatants, a substantial jump in tonnage and presumably in weapons capacity as well. During the launch ceremony for the lead ship in this class back in the spring, Kim explicitly stated that the vessel would carry anti-aircraft, anti-ship, anti-submarine, and anti-ballistic missile capabilities, in addition to nuclear-armed strategic cruise missiles and tactical ballistic missiles. He framed the program as central to what he called North Korea's maritime sovereignty, and said it was designed specifically to manage what he described as all military threats, including nuclear-based threats and naval blockades. He also pledged to eventually build larger cruisers and nuclear-powered submarines, which would represent an even more significant leap in both range and survivability for North Korea's naval forces. That combination of statements is worth reading carefully, because it tells you what Pyongyang believes this naval buildup is actually for. Framing the program around resisting naval blockades specifically suggests North Korean planners are thinking about scenarios where their coastline gets cut off from resupply or trade, the kind of pressure campaign that's been discussed for years as a potential response to renewed North Korean aggression. Building a destroyer fleet explicitly designed to blunt that kind of blockade, while also carrying nuclear-capable weapons, is a very specific strategic bet. That a credible naval deterrent, even a modest one compared to major global naval powers, raises the cost of any external pressure campaign enough to make outside powers think twice. For context on just how far behind North Korea's Navy has been relative to its ballistic missile program, Kim himself has previously described the Navy as the weakest branch of North Korea's armed forces, and this entire destroyer program appears to be a direct, deliberate attempt to close that gap. For years, North Korea's strategic weapons development was almost entirely focused on land-based ballistic missiles and the broader nuclear warhead program tied to them. The naval push represents a genuine pivot, an attempt to diversify where and how North Korea's nuclear and conventional strike capability physically sits, rather than concentrating everything in fixed, known, and therefore more easily targeted land-based sites. Now to the other major weapon system that's been central to North Korea's program and remains directly relevant to this weekend's naval test, the Hwasong-18. This is arguably North Korea's most advanced land-based missile, and it represents the other end of the delivery spectrum from what just happened aboard the Kangkon intercontinental range, rather than close-in naval strike capability. The Hwasong-18 is a 3-stage solid-fueled intercontinental ballistic missile, and it holds a specific and important distinction. It was the first solid-fuel ICBM North Korea ever developed. That distinction matters enormously from a strategic standpoint, because solid-fuel missiles can be prepared and launched dramatically faster than older liquid-fueled designs, which typically require a lengthy and visible fueling process before launch, a process that gives adversary satellites and intelligence services a meaningful window to detect preparation and potentially respond before the missile actually leaves the ground. A solid-fuel missile collapses that warning window substantially, which is precisely why its development marked such a significant technical milestone for North Korea's program. The Hwasong-18 was first publicly unveiled during a military parade back in February 2023, and its maiden test flight followed that April. In terms of raw specifications, the missile weighs roughly 60 tons, measures around 82 feet in length, and has a diameter of just under 7 feet. Its estimated range extends to roughly 9,300 miles, which is more than enough to reach any point on the North American continent, a fact North Korean state media has never been shy about emphasizing whenever the missile is tested or displayed. Between the naval crew's missile tests just conducted aboard the Kangkon and the continued development and periodic testing of the Hwasong-18 program, North Korea is simultaneously building out both ends of its strategic strike capability, long-range intercontinental reach on one side and closer-in, more flexible naval-based nuclear delivery on the other. Taken together, this is a genuinely comprehensive modernization effort, not a single isolated weapons test that grabbed headlines for a day and then faded. North Korea commissioned its first 5,000-ton destroyer just weeks ago. It's now pushing hard to get the second one fully operational within 2 months. It has a stated 5-year plan to keep building destroyers of this class at a rate of 2 per year, plus a follow-on class of even larger surface combatants already being discussed publicly by Kim himself. It's continuing to develop and refine its most advanced solid-fuel intercontinental missile. And it's doing all of this while deepening a military relationship with Russia that outside analysts increasingly believe is providing meaningful technical assistance to exactly this kind of naval modernization push. There's a broader geopolitical backdrop worth placing this into as well, because North Korea's weapons development rarely happens in a vacuum, disconnected from what else is going on around it globally. The same weekend, as North Korea was releasing footage of its cruise missile tests, American and Russian leadership were reportedly speaking directly by phone for close to an hour and a half, a call that happened to coincide with the American 250th anniversary weekend. North Korea's own deepening ties to Russia, including the widely reported military and technical cooperation that has intensified since Pyongyang began supplying troops and materiel to support Russia's war effort, sits directly behind a lot of the naval and missile modernization currently on display. Whatever technical knowledge, components, or expertise has flowed from Russia to North Korea as part of that broader relationship appears to be showing up directly in exactly the kind of hardware getting tested this week. It's also worth being precise about what can and can't be independently verified in a story like this, because North Korea's state media apparatus controls essentially all of the imagery and information coming out of these tests. Independent journalists were not given access to cover the destroyer weapons tests directly, and the photos and footage distributed by North Korea's government cannot be independently verified by outside observers. That doesn't mean the tests didn't happen. Multiple independent intelligence assessments and allied government statements have corroborated that North Korea does possess and continues to develop the broad categories of weapons systems being showcased. But the specific performance details, the exact success rate of the missile salvo, the precise capabilities of the destroyer's fire control systems, come entirely from a government with every incentive to present its own military hardware in the most impressive light possible. Healthy skepticism about the specific claims, layered on top of a general acceptance that the broader capability is real and advancing, is probably the most accurate way to process information coming out of Pyongyang on any story like this. So where does this leave the broader assessment of North Korea's threat trajectory right now? The country continues to expand its nuclear arsenal, continues to diversify how and where it can deliver that arsenal, and continues to receive what increasingly looks like meaningful outside technical support for at least some portion of that modernization effort. A naval platform capable of launching nuclear-armed cruise missiles adds a genuinely new dimension to what regional planners in South Korea, Japan, and the broader American security architecture in the Pacific have to account for, because it's no longer purely a question of monitoring known fixed missile sites. It's now also a question of tracking mobile naval platforms that could, in theory, reposition closer to a target before any strike scenario ever unfolds. This naval push also lands at a moment when regional security cooperation among Washington's Pacific allies has itself been shifting. Australia and Japan, for instance, have separately moved forward with major new warship supply agreements over the past several months, part of a broader pattern of allied navies investing more heavily in surface combatant capability across the region, partly in direct response to exactly the kind of North Korean and Chinese naval buildup that's been unfolding in parallel. South Korea's own government has repeatedly stated that it tracks North Korean naval and missile developments closely through its own intelligence architecture, working in coordination with American forces stationed on the peninsula, and Seoul's assessments have generally been more cautious than Pyongyang's own state media about how operationally mature these new destroyers actually are. That gap between North Korea's own triumphant framing and the more measured, skeptical read coming out of Allied intelligence services is worth keeping in mind every time a new test gets announced, since the two sides have very different incentives in how they characterize the same underlying hardware. It's also worth stepping back and placing this destroyer program within the longer arc of North Korea's strategic weapons development, because the pattern here is consistent with how Pyongyang has approached every major weapons category over the past 2 decades. Programs typically begin with a rocky, failure-prone testing phase, often including public setbacks that get quietly absorbed and worked through rather than abandoned, followed by a steady, incremental improvement cycle, and eventually a point where the capability gets showcased publicly with enough confidence that state media is willing to release detailed footage rather than vague statements. The Konkon's journey from a botched, capsized launch ceremony roughly a year ago to a warship now being put through live-fire weapons evaluations with the country's leader personally observing follows that exact pattern almost precisely. It suggests the naval program, whatever its ultimate ceiling and real combat effectiveness turns out to be, has moved past its most fragile early phase and into something North Korea now considers stable enough to build a real fleet around. None of this happened overnight, and none of it is likely to resolve quickly either. This is the latest data point in a modernization program that has been building steadily for years, accelerating meaningfully over roughly the past 18 months as North Korea has commissioned its first new destroyer class, pushed forward with solid fuel ICBM development, and deepened a military relationship with Russia that shows every sign of providing real technical dividends. That Russia relationship deserves one more layer of context, because it's arguably the single biggest variable shaping how fast North Korea's weapons programs have been able to move. Over the past couple of years, North Korea has sent troops, artillery shells, and ballistic missiles to support Russia's war effort, a level of direct military cooperation that would have been almost unthinkable a decade ago. In exchange, the widely held assessment among South Korean, American, and other allied intelligence services is that Pyongyang has been receiving technical assistance flowing back the other direction, potentially covering everything from satellite technology to submarine engineering to exactly the kind of naval combat systems now being tested aboard the Kangkon. Sanctions targeting this relationship have continued to be imposed by the United States, South Korea, and other partners, but the practical effect of those sanctions has been limited so far, in part because Russia itself is already under an extensive sanctions regime tied to its war in Ukraine, and has correspondingly less to lose from deepening ties with Pyongyang, regardless of what additional penalties get layered on top. Whether the international community responds to this latest round of testing with fresh sanctions, expanded regional missile defense cooperation, or simply continued monitoring and diplomatic statements of concern remains to be seen, and will likely depend heavily on how the broader Russia relationship, the ongoing war in Ukraine, and the general state of great power competition between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing continue to evolve over the coming months. What's certain right now is that North Korea has no visible intention of slowing this program down, and the footage released this weekend is best understood not as an isolated event, but as one more entry in a rapidly lengthening list of demonstrations meant to convince the rest of the world that Pyongyang's strategic weapons program is advancing on every front, simultaneously, at sea, on land, and in the increasingly close technical partnership it's built with Moscow along the way.